Well, hello there. This is Ed Sanderson, the CEO of Ducerus College Solution. We have a very special guest today. It's James Maroney. He's the founder and president of First Choice College Placement. And I wanted to have you on today because I want to talk about three things. We're going to talk about what the heck is going on with the SAT, ACT standardized test, kind of give us a little background on how we're here today and what impact it's having on the application and admissions process. We're also going to talk about whether or not it even makes sense for students to take it. And as this has evolved, the impact it's having on the number of applicants, particularly at schools that have traditionally been a little bit more challenging to get into. So let's get right into it. James, why are we having a conversation about whether or not a student should take an SAT or an ACT test?
Well, as you know, and I'm sure a lot of listeners know, there have been more colleges going test optional over the last few years. But up until the pandemic started, they were mainly small liberal arts colleges with small applicant pools where they could take the time to really look in depth at all of their applications. During the pandemic, a lot of the test times were canceled, right? They canceled administrations of both the SAT and ACT. It was difficult for students to take tests. And so many colleges, most colleges actually went test optional for 1 year. Some have extended that for this coming year. And so what we've seen is now students have the choice of whether or not they want to submit the scores. And as you mentioned, because the colleges had gone test optional, some of the Ivy League schools, I think Dartmouth actually saw an over 50% increase in applications.
Wow.
Yale went from in the 30,000 applications to over 44,000 applications. So I think they were over a 30% increase. I think the minimum increase in applications to the Ivy League schools was like around 25%. So all of the top schools saw significant increases in the number of students applying because, before there was that kind of unofficial cutoff where if you didn't have at least a 1400, you kind of knew it was a long shot, right, to get in. And not that, what I've always told people is good scores don't guarantee that you get in, but bad scores can definitely keep you out, right? And so the people who weren't high enough weren't taking that shot, but now most people took the shot at the school, or more people took a shot at the school. So, there are some good things we're seeing in that there were some more diverse classes admitted. There were more first-generation college students admitted. Number of students at University of Pennsylvania increased from 18% who needed a Pell Grant to 20%. So we're seeing a little more economic diversity in the classes. But what we are seeing is that of the students who are accepted, a lot of them did end up sending in their test scores, right? And so it wasn't all, right? But there were, more people submitting their test scores to the top schools than not, which is the opposite of, some of the other schools that went test optional. I think on the college or on the common application, just under half submitted their test scores. But, at University of Pennsylvania, when it was early decision, 2/3 of the students submitted their test scores. But the interesting thing is 2/3 of the applicants submitted their test scores, 66%. But 3/4 of those people who had been accepted had submitted their test scores. While you don't need it, it is test optional. I think we are seeing that if you have good test scores, it definitely does help.
Students are like, heck, I don't have scores that I'm either proud of or I didn't take the test. I have nothing to lose. Let's go for it. What do you think that fundamentally means in terms of expectations? Do you think that students are being realistic about that? Or do you agree, which is what the heck, you got nothing to lose, go ahead and submit an application without a score?
I mean, it depends. If it's a big reach, right? And you want to take the shot like the lottery, right? You can't win if you don't play. You can do that. I think probably if you have good test scores, it's to your advantage to submit them. Test blind, meaning even if you submit the scores, we're not going to look at them. There are only 60 colleges in the country that are test blind, meaning that of the thousands of schools, and there are probably, hundreds, if not more than 1,000 are test optional now. the vast majority of them still look at your scores if you submit them, right?
Yeah.
And so it comes down to having a good plan, because what I would say is it makes sense to just take the test, see how you do, and then decide whether or not you're going to submit it. Although there are some schools who in the past have said that we want to see every score of every test that you've taken. So even though they're test optional, and I haven't checked to see what they're doing with next year, but Yale and Georgetown are two schools that come to mind that, if you had taken a test, they wanted to see that score. I don't know now that they're test optional if they are still have that policy that if you take it, you have to submit it, in which case you would want to be careful before you took it. The other thing to remember is that there are a dozen or so states in the country where every high school student takes the SAT test, because every public school student, because they give it to all the public school students to assess college readiness per No Child Left Behind. And there are about a dozen who give every student the ACT. So there are a lot of kids who are still going to be taking the tests. And that's, again, where you're going to want to see, if I take it, am I going to have to send it, to those schools, in which case it makes sense to be as ready as possible if they're going to have to see those scores. But, if you're applying to schools that don't make you send them if you've taken it, you only send it if it's going to put you in a good light, right? And so it's another option. It's another piece of the application, right? Another piece of that application puzzle that could help differentiate you, because, what we have seen is there's grade inflation. And I think colleges know that, a lot of high schools. And so it's hard for schools to know, especially the larger state schools, what does an A at Marion High School in San Diego mean versus what does an A at Fairfield Prep in Fairfield, Connecticut mean? So, which the test score has in the past been their common measuring stick. Whatever you think of it, whatever it measures the same thing, from the different students. So
I'm kind of curious from your perspective, if we pull out the SAT or the ACT and put it off to the side, what should parents be telling their kids, or what should kids be doing to help position themselves to get admitted to some of these schools?
We've seen that the essay has increased in importance, which is interesting because I just read an article how that more tightly correlates with family income than the SAT or ACT. So in some ways, you're leaving one metric that they had said was unfair and going to an even more unfair metric. If you can interviewing, more schools now are just offering them through Zoom. Right, the Zoom interviews, looking at if it's a private school, the demonstrated interest, right? And now you don't even have to go on campus for the tour to show that level of interest. It's signing up for a Zoom information session, virtual tour, finding out who's going to read your application, sending him or her an email, asking them a question, somehow getting in their file, right? Getting on their radar. Even if you don't think you're going to play a sport, emailing a coach to inquire about it at the school, filling out whatever forms you can, if you, theater, whatever, newspaper, whatever you think you may want to go into, reaching out to an advisor on campus, because some of the schools are told, and this is more the smaller liberal arts schools, but any touch a student makes, it should go to the admissions office, and then it goes into your file, right? So the more touches, the more serious they think you are. And so, again, it's not all schools that look at demonstrated interest, but a lot of them do look at demonstrated interest. They want, like anything in life, we want those who want us, right? And so they want the students who want them and have shown that. Grades, have been important, will be important, but the question is, how are schools going to differentiate? And so, the schools, again, the smaller schools, the larger state schools don't really have the ability to do this, but the liberal arts schools, they recruit by the school, so they get to know the strength of the school. A lot of colleges, unfortunately, have to recalculate a GPA because all high schools are on different systems, right? And so they try to put everyone on the same system. So, the colleges will be developing, but from when I had sat in on an information session they did for alumni of Yale, the Yale director of admissions, and he said it wasn't as hard as they thought to look when they decided they were going to go test optional. They had to look at all of these other metrics. It wasn't as hard as they thought to craft a class. But it still is harder, right? If you don't have that common measuring stick. So, at some point there may be other things that come into play, but basically now all the other pieces of the application take on a little more importance.
Standardized test score also can be a vehicle that can be used to get merit scholarships. So with that in mind, first of all, do you agree with that statement? And second, if that's the case, how important is it to go and try to do the best on that test as possible anyways?
One, standardized tests are still important because US News and World Report still looks at average test scores when they're rating schools. So until they eliminate that, test scores are going to be important to schools. And so they like buying higher average test scores, which means they give scholarships to people based on test scores. And, you know, I haven't read the book yet. I read an interview with the author, but Susan Paterno wrote a book called Game On, Why College Admission is Rigged and How to Beat the System. And she says, you're not going to really see change until you decouple financial aid from standardized test scores, right? Going test optional. And so what that means, you know, is that it is coupled, right? We're not going to see real change until it's decoupled. So there is a definite link between getting good scores and getting bigger scholarships, right? And so it's important for students, if they can do well, and if they're applying to schools where their scores are going to put them in that top 25%, to submit those scores. And maybe they don't want to take an official test. Maybe they just want to take a practice test. I think you have them available. We offer them, you know, through our business, free practice tests. And we have a 1-hour test if you don't want to take the full 3 hours that we can send to students so they can figure out where their scores are and what they would need to do to improve them, right? And lay that roadmap out for them.
You've got this really cool tool that parents and students can use to plug in their standardized tests to see what schools are offering merit scholarship based on those scores. And conversely, if you improve the score, what type of money you could get at other institutions. So James has great resources available. We're going to put some links to his company in this conversation so that you guys can really get the information you need to make smart choices moving forward. So walk them through what you tell families to do if they're going to actually go down and actually take a test. And I'm more interested in what they do before they actually take the test versus the day they take it.
Looking at just preparing, right? And like the road to good test scores is the same as the road to Carnegie Hall. Practice, 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 you know, and so using actual tests. And so what we've done is we've set up diagnostics based on the official practice tests that the College Board has released. And then we've broken it down to the skill areas. So you take a practice test, you see what are your weakest skill areas, you work on them, right? And improve them, and then take another practice test. And I would say over the 20 plus years of doing this, the students whose scores have improved the most have taken practice tests, and they've taken extra practice tests if they can. Right now, we used to proctor them in our office, but now we proctor them via Zoom, right? Which means that anyone can take them. They just print it out ahead of time and then take a picture of their answer sheet, send it, we'll grade it, send them a diagnostic report. And so I would say that's really the way to work and prepare for the test. Same way I used to study for exams in school, right? You take a practice test, see what you don't know, study up on it, right? And work on that to get ready. And so that's kind of the formula that we've used with students. And, you know, we offer either group classes, one-on-one tutoring, or we have a self-guided course. In the self-guided course, people can take practice tests on their own, put in their answers on their own, and then it'll link directly to the videos that they should watch for their skill areas.
You know, there are two different tests. I think one of the things that comes out of diagnostic is you can try to ascertain which one is better suited for the student's test-taking style and or their knowledge base. Can you talk just briefly about why it's important to determine which one fits the best versus just randomly taking a test?
A lot of it, you know, boils down to time, right? Students are busy. They're doing activities. They're doing their application. They may be working. They have to study for their classes. So if you can figure out which test is better, you don't have to prepare for both, right? You can kind of get focused in. What we found is about half the students, either test is pretty much the same for them. But, you know, there are a quarter students for whom the SAT is better and a quarter of the students for whom the ACT is better. And that's one thing we just want to find out, right? Which one fits your style better, and then prepare for that one, right? And so again, that you're focused and you're giving yourself the best chance to succeed, right? And that's what everything is about. Opportunities. Higher test scores give you more opportunities for money, more opportunities for colleges to get accepted at. Knowing which test is better for you gives you a better opportunity of maximizing your score.
If a student wants to make significant improvement, what type of time commitment are they putting in on those subject areas to improve to show the greatest return on investment?
You're looking at, between practice tests and tutoring, reviewing homework, 20 to 40 hours, right? So you're looking at putting in a full work week, but in cases that could improve your scholarship money. If you go up, our average increase is about 108 points on the SAT, which could mean thousands of dollars more. I remember once, I had a student, we were trying to get him eligible because he had a full scholarship offer to play football in college. And so we needed to get him to that number. I said, look, which again was $40,000 a year. So it was $160,000. I said, there's probably no other legal way for the rest of your life that you can work 40 hours and make $160,000. So let's do this.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the piece that gets missed, is that preparation gives a return on investment. That return on investment is scholarship dollars. And we're having this conversation now because we're in summer as we're recording this, and that's typically where we'd like to see students make the biggest commitment to their future education goals. So James, really good information. I appreciate the input and the time. If folks want to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to reach out and learn more about how they can prepare for the test?
And thank you for having me on here. And we've had a long working relationship and friendship. So thank you for everything for over the years. The best way to find me is probably through the website, firstchoicecollege.com. And then we'll give you the link, I think, to, if people want to take the free 1-hour diagnostic test that you can put down below. So thank you.
You're welcome. So in recap, y'all, just because a school says they're test blind doesn't mean you shouldn't take the test. And I would argue, even if you're looking at schools that say, test optional, that's a no-brainer. You do it. And I think the takeaway here is you have nothing to lose and everything to gain. So it would be valuable time well invested if you were able to dig into this and understand that the number of applicants is going up at some of these premium, premier, high-end, top-level colleges and universities. And although we don't know what the future of standardized testing really is going to be, we do know that there's still a place for it in today's academic and admissions process. So make the investment. And I would also argue that, as a side point, James talked about it, this is also the time to be working on college admissions essays and personal statements, because if they're not going to look at scores, they're going to look closer at you as an individual, what you're about, what you're made of. And I mean, we didn't talk about it, but we want to get into what activities you're pursuing even now in the summer to show that you're seriously interested. And by the way, if you didn't pick up on what James said, demonstrated interest is kind of a big thing. It doesn't get talked about a lot, but it shows the school that you're serious about them. So on behalf of James Maroney, founder and president of First Choice College Placement, this is Ed Sanderson, CEO of Ducerus. Talk to you soon. Take care.